Is that all?
Not even close! Then show me! Take this!
Oakland, California, August 1964. It is 11:15 at night. The air inside the gym on Broadway Street is not just stale. It is heavy with that acidic humidity produced only by old sweat and rusted metal. Outside, the city sleeps, but inside the blinds are drawn and the door is secured with a double lock. There are no television cameras, no sports reporters looking for the story of the century, not even an audience to applaud. There are only 6 people in total, the sepulchral silence of a sanctuary, and the weight of a bet that, if it went wrong, would erase a man's name before the world ever came to know him. I have spent 30 years digging through archives no one wants to open, separating myth from reality in the back alleys of San Francisco's martial arts scene. I have heard thousands of stories about Bruce Lee, but this one is different. This was not a Hollywood choreography nor a tournament with gentlemanly rules. What happened that night was a brutal physical experiment. It was the night when absolute mass tried to crush water and ended up begging for air. Many tried to erase the record of this encounter because the defeat was so surgical that it defied the logic of the strength promoters of the era. To them, it was impossible that 60 kilograms of bone and fiber could stop a freight train of 140 kilograms of pure muscle. It all began 3 weeks earlier with a hand-delivered letter, a letter Bruce never should have opened, but one his scientific pride would not allow him to ignore. The message was short, crude, written by someone who understood nothing about Eastern philosophy, only raw results. It said, "I've seen your videos. You're not a fighter, you're a fragile dancer. Come prove that your fingers can stop my embrace." The signature belonged to Martha V., known in Europe's underground circuit as the Crusher, a woman who was a natural anomaly, 140 kilograms of solid structure, a powerlifting champion and an expert in grappling techniques who had left 100 kilograms men with shattered ribs simply by closing her arms around them. Martha did not come alone. She was backed by a German promoter, a cynical man who saw strength exhibitions as a gold mine. To them, Bruce Lee was a dangerous trend, a young man convincing people that technique could replace size, and in the world of Iron Giants of the 1960s, that was a heresy that had to be punished. They wanted to humiliate him in his own school, in front of his own allies, to prove that in the end the physics of mass always wins. Bruce accepted the challenge on his own terms. He did not want a circus spectacle. He summoned Martha and her team at midnight to the back courtyard of James Lee's school, a place that, to those in the know, was sacred ground. James Lee, the man who held the keys to Oakland's mystique, was the only true witness on Bruce's side. He knew his friend was risking too much. If Bruce lost, if his chest was crushed by that woman, his career in the United States would die before it was born. No one would take seriously a master defeated by a fairground strongwoman, as skeptics called her. But Bruce was not afraid, he was focused. In the days leading up to the encounter, James noticed that Bruce was not training his usual kicks. He was not shouting or making spectacular movements. He spent hours in total silence, studying biomechanics diagrams and specific pressure points of the brachial plexus. He was searching for the flaw in a Titan's design. To Bruce, Martha was not an opponent. She was an engineering problem that needed to be solved with the minimum amount of energy possible. On the night of the meeting, the atmosphere was electric. The German promoter and 2 bodyguards, who looked like stone walls, flanked Martha. She wore a sleeveless shirt that revealed arms the diameter of Bruce's thighs. Her mere presence displaced the air in the room. On the other side, Bruce wore his black training clothes, simple, almost invisible. The visual difference was absurd, almost comical, if not for the tension that could be cut with a knife. The German promoter broke the silence with a dry laugh. "Look at him, Martha. If you squeeze him too hard, we'll have to scoop him up with a shovel," he said in heavily accented English. Bruce did not even blink. His eyes were fixed on the woman's center of gravity, as if he were seeing through her skin, analyzing where muscle ended and where the vulnerability of bone structure began. The rules of the confrontation were brutal and restrictive, designed specifically to put Bruce at a disadvantage. Closed fists were not allowed. Bruce could not use his famous long kicks to keep distance. The objective was to neutralize her up close on her own ground. And the golden rule. If Martha managed to secure a bear hug, that embrace of death, for more than 3 seconds, Bruce accepted total defeat. It was a trap. She only needed to catch him once to end the story. Bruce, on the other hand, had to be perfect in every millimeter of movement. The promoter pulled out a pocket stopwatch, but Bruce raised his hand. "No need for a watch," he said in that calm voice hiding steel confidence. "This will end before you feel the tick-tock." The arrogance of the phrase enraged Martha. She was used to men fearing her, retreating before her mass. Seeing a 60 kilograms young man looking at her with almost clinical curiosity was the greatest insult of her career. The encounter began without a clear signal, simply with Martha's first step forward. She did not move like a heavy, clumsy person. She had the agility of someone who had spent years mastering her own weight. She lunged with a fast swipe, aiming to seize Bruce's neck and drag him into her chest. In any other circumstance, the move would have ended in a broken neck or immediate suffocation. Martha's bodyguards were already smiling, savoring the easy victory. But then something happened that no one in that room could explain at the time. Just as Martha's fingers were millimeters from Bruce's skin, he did not retreat. He did not jump back like a frightened rabbit. He simply tilted his body axis a few degrees. It was a movement of barely an inch, an economy of energy so extreme it seemed time had slowed down. Martha, driven by 140 kilograms of inertia, found herself grabbing air. The void Bruce left was so sudden that she lost her balance for an instant. It was only a second, a blink. But in that total silence, the sound of her feet scraping against the wooden floor thundered through the room. She stopped confused, eyes wide open. She could not understand how she had missed. Her speed was legendary in her circuit, and that man had not even seemed to exert effort to evade her. "You're using too much energy for something so simple," Bruce remarked, keeping his hands low and relaxed. No one expected Bruce to be so insolent. The German promoter shouted something in his language, urging Martha to stop playing. Red with frustration and wounded pride, she prepared for a second attack. This time she would not go for the neck. She would use her mass to corner him, closing the space so he would have nowhere to tilt away. The air in the gym grew even heavier. James Lee, watching from the corner, clenched his fists. He knew Martha was about to unleash a total attack, one that left no margin for error. She crouched slightly, lowering her center of gravity, preparing to charge like a bull. Bruce, meanwhile, closed his eyes for a brief second, synchronizing his breathing with the rhythm of his opponent's heartbeat. Few know that Bruce had already won the fight in his mind before Martha took the second step. He was not fighting a woman, he was fighting the idea that size is necessarily power. He was about to prove that the heaviest steel always yields to the point of a well-directed diamond. But the part that should never have leaked, the moment when physics definitively defeated brute force, was about to happen in a way that would leave the witnesses terrified, unable to explain it. Martha charged again, this time with desperate force, seeking full contact, the embrace that would break Bruce, the thunder of her steps vibrating the old weights on the racks. And just when it seemed absolute mass would swallow water, Bruce extended his left hand, not to strike but to touch, a single contact that would forever change the perception of everyone present. What happened in that microsecond was a lesson in applied physics the German promoter could not process. Bruce did not try to stop 140 kilograms with brute force. That would have been like trying to stop a landslide with bare hands. Instead, he used Martha's own inertia. As she closed in, Bruce placed the palm of his left hand on her right shoulder and, with a hip rotation of barely 3 centimeters, diverted the axis of her attack. It was like watching a matador evade a bull, but with a crucial difference. There was no artistic elegance, only anatomical precision. Martha went past him, stumbling under her own weight. Her arms, built to crush ribs, closed on empty air with a dry snap, a whip of fabric and muscle that found no resistance. The momentum carried her into the back wall of the gym. The impact was dull and heavy like a giant sandbag dropped from a third floor. The silence that followed was absolute. The German promoter stood frozen, mouth open, stopwatch still in hand, completely forgetting his role as judge. The bodyguard stepped forward tensely, unable to understand how their champion, the woman who had bent steel bars at fairs across Europe, was now staggering against a wall, searching for balance that would not come. But here logic breaks. Martha was not injured, she was humiliated. And humiliation in someone who lives by strength is dangerous fuel. She turned slowly. Her face was no longer that of a competitor, but of a wounded beast. Sweat ran down her temples and her eyes were bloodshot. She said nothing. She simply let out a guttural roar and returned to the center, moving slower now, more aware, closing angles so Bruce would have no space to turn. The German promoter broke the silence with a hoarse shout. "That doesn't count. You're just running, little dancer. Fight like a man or admit your technique is trash." The man was desperate. He saw his investment, his crusher, being ridiculed by someone weighing less than half of her. James Lee remained motionless in his corner. He knew Bruce was not running, he was reading. He was waiting for the moment when her structure opened just enough for a single point of entry. Martha closed the distance. This time she did not charge. She walked with heavy steps, suffocating Bruce's vital space. Her arms were extended, ready for the bear hug that, by the rules, would give her victory in 3 seconds. Bruce was against one of the wooden columns of the school. He had nowhere to go. The bodyguards smiled. For them the game was over. Mass had finally cornered water. Then came the part that should never have entered the official records of Lee's biography. Martha threw her arms forward in a final movement, wrapping Bruce's torso. It was full contact. You could hear the fabric of Bruce's training clothes creak under the pressure of those colossal biceps. The promoter began to count 1. Martha squeezed with her entire soul. Her face turned purple with effort. It was the embrace of death, the move that had given her worldwide fame. But Bruce did not flinch. Instead of fighting the grip, instead of trying to pry apart those steel arms, he did something that defied every survival instinct. He completely relaxed, exhaled all the air from his lungs, reducing the volume of his rib cage, and in that millimeter of space he gained, he moved his right hand upward. It was not a punch, it was not a kick, it was a single finger. Bruce extended his index finger and drove it with a short, almost invisible vibration into an exact point, just below Martha's clavicle, in the hollow where the nerves of the brachial plexus are briefly exposed beneath the muscle. It was the famous 1-inch touch, applied with the precision of a scalpel to an overloaded nervous system. The effect was instant and devastating. Martha let out a moan that did not sound like pain but like a short circuit. Her arms, which a second earlier could have crushed a barrel, flew open, losing all tension. Her knees buckled as if someone had cut the cables holding her up. The 140 kilograms of muscle collapsed onto the floor with dead weight, kicking up a cloud of dust from the gym's old wooden boards. She remained on her knees, eyes wide, staring into nothing. She could not breathe. Not because Bruce had struck her throat, but because the neural shock had frozen her diaphragm for an instant. There was the Titan of Europe, begging for air before a man who had barely messed up his hair. The bodyguards stepped back in terror. They did not understand what they had just seen. There was no blood, no broken bones, no spectacular blow. Just one finger and a fall that felt pulled from a horror movie. The German promoter dropped the stopwatch. The glass shattered, marking the end of the bet, and possibly the end of his champion's career. Bruce stepped back and took a deep breath. His face returned to that clinical calm, almost indifferent. "Strength without direction is just a burden for the one who possesses it," he said softly, almost to himself. There was no celebration, no mockery. Bruce approached Martha, who was still trying to recover her breath, and offered her his hand. She looked at him with a respect bordering on panic. She had just understood that everything she believed about physical power was a lie. She had been defeated by the science of anatomy, not by the strength of an arm. What followed was a gentleman's pact, or rather a pact of survival. The German promoter knew that if it leaked that a woman of that caliber had been dropped by a 60 kilograms man with a single finger, the business of strength exhibitions would die that very night. No one would pay to watch a giant who could be switched off like a lamp by someone small. James Lee convinced everyone present that the truth was too dangerous. For the martial community of the era, which still believed in the supremacy of heavyweights, this story would have caused unnecessary chaos. It was agreed that the encounter never happened. The 2 Polaroid cameras the bodyguards carried were confiscated, and the negatives were burned in a trash can in the backyard. Martha and her team left Oakland that same dawn. Rumors say she was never the same again on the strength circuit. She had seen the abyss, had felt her own mass turn against her. And that is a lesson time does not erase. Bruce, for his part, returned to his diagrams. For him, that night was not a trophy, it was a scientific validation of his Jeet Kune Do. He did not need the applause of the masses because he already had the confirmation of physics. Today that gym on Broadway Street no longer exists, or at least not as it did then. But those of us who know Oakland's lost archives know that the sweat stains on those boards told a story very different from the movies. This story proves that the belief that size beats technique is the greatest deception in the history of combat. In the end, brute force is a loud language, but precision is a whisper that can stop a heart. Bruce Lee did not defeat a 140 kilograms woman that night. He defeated the arrogance of muscle. He left us a lesson that still echoes in gyms where truth is sought above spectacle. The heaviest steel always yields to the point of a well-directed diamond. The world can continue debating who was the strongest, who had the hardest punch, or who lifted the most weight, but in the darkness of that August night in 1964 it became clear that true power is not measured in kilos, but in the ability to understand the human body as a perfect machine and find the switch that can shut it down with a single finger. That night, silence was louder than any victory shout. And that silence is what has kept alive the legend of what really happened when the lights went out and only the truth remained. Those who were there never saw the world the same way again, because once you see a giant fall to a whisper of movement, you understand that reality is far stranger and far more lethal than Hollywood ever allowed us to see.